Afternoon, everybody. My name's Philip Bowering. I'm here not because I was once president, but because I'm delighted with the appearance of this book, Majapahit. And I'm delighted, additionally, that it's written by one of our members and edited by one of our other members. I'm particularly excited by it because about 6 years ago, I was writing a book about maritime Southeast Asia called Empire of the Winds, and I wanted to write a chapter about Majapahit. And I found that there was no book in English devoted entirely to this subject. So eventually I was able to manage to write a chapter, which was kind of adequate from various sources, but it was an illustration of the fact that in the English language, and among English language academics, there is a profound ignorance of the whole history of the Indonesian archipelago. I can't say just how angry I was at the reaction of a major London publisher, who's actually published one of my books, to the suggestion of a book about the Majapahit written by somebody who wasn't an academic, but was a banker, which merely showed to me the stupidity and the ignorance of a certain class of publisher in English language. So anyway, enough of my talk. After Herald has spoken, we will have plenty of time for questions. So off we go.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to stand, but I can't move too much. The cameraman told me to stay a bit right here. So thanks, first of all, for coming. I'm also going to say thank you to Ibu Endang here, who came here from the Indonesian consulate. Thank you very much. Here we are. Thank you. And I'm going to give you a quick rundown over what Majapahit is and why it's important, but I'm going to actually start with about 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you followed the news in Indonesia, but there were protests on the streets in Indonesia. One of the things that people are worried about is that the outgoing president is trying to get his two sons in particular political positions, presumably to keep influence over the next presidency or the policies that will be implemented. But some people see that, rightly or wrongly, I'm not here to say what is right or wrong, but as a building of dynasties. In one of the demonstrations, and I believe this was a photo I saw in a Indonesian newspaper in Yogyakarta in Central Java, people walked with a banner and said, "We do not want bitter times." Now that doesn't sound like striking so much. You do not want bitter times. Who wants bitter times? But bitter times in Indonesia, it says, "Kita tolak masa pahit." And it's a reference to Majapahit. They say, we do not want the dynasty stuff that we've seen in the past, and we reject that. So they use history and the story of Majapahit to a large extent to bring their grievances or their disagreements to the street. So it's still very much alive. There is other things I will try when I tell you the story, how Majapahit has evolved, to make a few connections to what's happening in Indonesia now. There are very visible, but sometimes also less visible sort of signs that directly come still from Majapahit. It was an empire, and I'll tell you in a second where it was and when it was, that really shaped Southeast Asia to a very large extent. The Singaporean flag and the Malaysian flag have the Majapahit colors in them. They don't always know that, but red and white were the colors of Majapahit and of the Majapahit Navy, and is still, of course, the color of the Indonesian flag as well. But we're going to go back and tell you first where it was and when it was. So we're talking about East Java. So if you fly from here to Surabaya, it's about an hour's drive to a town called Mojokerto, and there is what the center was of Majapahit. If you ever go there, I would actually tell you not to necessarily go to that particular town, although it was the center. Go further south, there's another city called Blitar, and there's a magnificent temple that is after, I believe, the Borobudur and the Prambanan in Java, probably the third most impressive temple in the whole of Indonesia. hardly anybody goes there. Myself and my wife have been there numerous times. Every time I look at the book and see the number of people that go there, you talk about 5 or 6 people that go there every day. Borobudur, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, who go there. So it's a beautiful temples are still around. The thing that Majapahit misses is not only English language books, that's right, but also it misses one big temple. There is this temple, but it misses something like an Angkor Wat. This was an empire that was bigger than the one that ran Angkor Wat. It's one of the biggest empires that nobody's really heard of. And one of the issues is that they don't have one big temple that makes it extremely visible. And I'll tell you in a second why this is the case. But first, so we've identified where it is. It is basically East Java. The remnants of Majapahit, aside from temples, you've probably seen already if you've gone to Bali. Bali is Hindu-Buddhist. In Bali, people are yellow, white, the colors. The ceremonies that you have in Bali, on the streets you have the Ganesha statues to protect you against accidents. That all comes from Majapahit. In the end, when Majapahit went down, it was overtaken by Muslim forces that were on the north coast of Java, and the people put all their stuff that they had on bull carts, on ships, and sailed to Bali. That was safe, and that's where they continue to live on. So Majapahit is still here. It's why Bali is so Hindu-Buddhist and not so Islam, even until today. So we've identified where it is. Now we're going to talk about the time. The actual time, it starts in 1290, say, give or take, 1290. But I'm going to start actually a couple hundred years before to tell you the story, because that's when something happened that really set in motion the whole state of affairs. But the empire technically was from 1290 to about 1520. I actually think we should count it from 1220 to 1520. So you're talking about a good 200 years. And when it was at its peak, it controlled areas, and how much the control is open to debate, from southern Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, onto the southern part of the Philippines as well. So this was a magnificent, large empire. Now, I'm going to start actually around the year 1050. At that time, there was a king, and the belief was in your life, if you were a good Buddhist, you initially would, as a child, you train yourself, then you would make a family, you would make money, and in the latter stages of your life, you would retreat into the forest to contemplate about life, and eventually come back as a guru, a teacher, to tell other people what you had contemplated. And this is exactly what a king called Erlanga did. He says, I'm going to retreat into the forest. I've been a king for a long time. I'm going to divide the two lands, the land that I have that was in East Java, into two for my two sons. And that's where it went wrong. He called in a magician, that's what you did in those days, to fly over the lands with holy water to separate the lands into two. The magician, what is it, magician? Yes. The magic man, he did that. He got some water from Bali, apparently, flew through the sky and sprinkled the water down in order to separate the lands by magic. Unfortunately to him, he got stuck in a tamarind tree and couldn't finalize the job. That is what the legend says. If that's true or not, you can believe it to you. He got stuck in a tamarind tree. He went down. He condemned the tamarind, the tree, to not be able to grow any further. And he settled down and set up a vihara, a sort of monastery there. That place is called Vurare. It's a very small place, but the monastery is actually still there with a large sleeping Buddha. It also meant that the land that was to be separated, they were not able to separate. So a unification, and this is the recurring theme, a unification was still possible thereafter. He wasn't able to separate, unification is still possible. 200 years later, the lands were divided, and the sons and their grandsons, they, of course, as it goes, they were fighting against each other. They were trying to kill each other, and eventually a man comes up. His name is Ken Arok. He was effectively a murderer, a killer, a rapist, a liar, a cheat. Everything he did pretty bad. The only thing that he had, that one of the gods was his father. Brahma was his father. So every time he got into problems, Brahma helped him out. And eventually he was able, with being a little bit clever, to take over control over one side of these two lands. He attacked the other side of the land and got that one as well. In 1222, there's a battle of Ganta, big elephants going around, people battling around in the mountains. He wins, and unifies the lands. And what does he do? He sets up a dynasty. His children become, therefore, the kings thereafter. So this is a common man, a man that comes from nowhere. He had no royal blood, that becomes a king and sets a dynasty. And this is, of course, what we now have in Indonesia. Jokowi Widodo, the president of Indonesia, is considered to be a commoner, a carpenter, was in wood business for a long time, and rose up through the ranks, became the president of Indonesia, and setting up a dynasty as well. So these are the parallels that we again see. Now, the problem is, of course, he does exactly the same as his predecessor 200 years earlier. He has multiple sons who all go fight it out, and they kill each other. It takes about 30 years until one of them, this is the grandson of Ken Arok, says, enough. I'm going to stabilize this place. I'm going to put my son on the throne, 5 years old. And that 5-year-old kid, his name is Kertanegara, we're talking a little bit about him. He became the king probably around 1255, we're talking about here. And he did that to make sure that by the time that king died, that his son would be considered to be the legitimate king of Eastern Java. And that was to a large extent the case. He died 20 years later, and pretty much most people, there were a few rebellions, but quickly Kertanegara got that sorted out. He was the king of large parts of Java, Central and East Java, not West Java. Kertanegara did then something that's quite important and explains why there is no big Angkor Wat size of temple in East Java. What did he do? He gave power to the individual districts to build their own temples. That was the big thing to do. You are tax-free, you can build your own temple. Other lands had to pay taxes to him. But he said, if you build a temple, I sign off on it, you don't have to pay taxes. Now, all the Buddhists and the Hindus there were very happy and all willing to support him in his continuing reign as king. So he basically controlled domestically, and he solidified his control. What he also did in good corporate fashion maybe as well, in HSBC, we have a new CEO coming in, he wiped out some of the top management. This is what Kertanegara did as well. He took everybody out there and put in his own people that he knew and his friends in key positions to control the empire. And he solidified this, and he did this at the right time, because there was a complete new threat coming for, we're not even in Majapahit. The moment that Majapahit rises will come. This was the city of Singasari. It's now Malang. He did that because there was a new threat. Kublai Khan, far north in Beijing, decided that he'd gone already, or his family had gone and taken the lands all the way to Italy, basically, the Adriatic Sea. He wanted to go into the rest of Asia. So he invaded Korea, Japan, and he went south. He struggled with Vietnam, but eventually got control there. And he went into what is now Burma and Thailand. Now, Singasari in East Java was a trading center that did pretty good. That's where they made their money. What did they trade? They traded with the Indians, who sailed over. They traded with the Chinese, who sailed over. And, of course, with East Indonesia. So those were the three kind of key trading routes that all came together in East Java. That's where he made his money. He could get taxes from it. But if Kublai Khan was able to get control over the South China Sea, and you can, of course, see the sort of parallels with today again, if they were able to get control of the South China Sea and control of the Malacca Strait, well, Kublai Khan could say, you're not going to stop in Majapahit there, or in Singasari as it was still called. You got to stop and pay taxes to me in probably what is now Singapore, Temasek. So Kertanegara realized this is a threat. If I get cut off from these trading routes, I get a problem because we will just be a small town again. So what did he do? He puts his army in Sumatra. He puts his army in Kalimantan, Borneo. He puts his army in a few other places as well, in order to make sure that he has military control over that area. And that works for the moment. But that wasn't the only thing, because not only did he hear that Kublai Khan was trying to send his ships down to the South China Sea, he also heard that Kublai Khan had another weapon, and that was he was elevated to become an enlightened being. He had spiritual power. So, if you get the book, I believe it was page 97, we looked it up just now, that picture that you were talking about. Kublai Khan needed to get spiritual power as well in order to have that spiritual warfare with Kublai Khan. So what did Kertanagara do? As you want to have that, you go midnight cemetery, you go to the cemetery at midnight, you drink palm wine, you eat fish, you eat meat, that's two things you have to eat as well. You chant, you dance, and you do all kinds of other, say, tantric exercises with some of the other people that have joined in. And through that, you get Sakti, you get power, and you imbue that in statues. And that's a process we don't have to go into detail either. And these statues were then shipped off to what is now Cambodia, Sumatra, Kalimantan. So not only did he have a military sort of area that he under control, but he created a spiritual halo as well. And in the process of doing so, Kertanagara unifies what we call Indonesia for the first time. If there is ever a debate about when Indonesia should have its birthday, it has its Independence Day, it just had 17th of August, but I think there is a birthday we could have, because at some point in time he realizes he's ready, he has that whole area under control. Bali he invaded, East Indonesia, Kalimantan, Sumatra, Temasek. He creates a ceremony whereby he is brought up as an enlightened being. There's a picture of that. That's page, which page was that? 97. Is that 97? Or was it the other one? That's another picture. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's in the book. You can find it. You can see him standing like that. 90? 99, like this. And he has a big ceremony to be elevated to an enlightened being. And where does he do this? He does this where the tamarind tree stood, where the magician went over the land and could not separate the lands, and where therefore you could unify the lands. So he goes there, has a ceremony to unify what we now call Indonesia for the first time. Now, he's ready, and Kublai Khan shows up. He sends a diplomat called Meng Qi over, very unfortunate man, because that man's message is, you have to submit yourself to Kublai Khan. Just, give us a couple of turtles and maybe give us a parrot, but just say that you are the vassal of Kublai Khan. That's the only thing we want. We don't want anything else. And Kertanagara walks over to the man, grabs his knife, his kris, and cuts off the guy's nose. Now imagine if any country would cut off the nose of the US ambassador and send him back to Washington. You can see this guy, he knew what he was doing, and he said, you go back. I don't want to hear of it. I'm not going to submit myself. Of course, Kublai Khan, 6-7 months later when the guy comes back, is enraged, and he orders the construction of a few thousand ships to invade Java and get these people to submit. If not friendly, then by force. He does that. But it takes about 2 years. You have to build the ships, got to wait for the monsoon to come, you're going to sail all the way over. The people in Vietnam saw the ships pass and said, oh my God, what's happening here? And realized, oh, thank God, they're going somewhere else, they're not invading us. So there they went, and eventually the Chinese end up in Java again to invade and teach this Kertanagara a lesson. This is about 3 years later. But in that 3 years, a lot happened in Java. Because Kertanagara had put his army all around Indonesia, he didn't have his army in his own city. And he was attacked, and this goes back to these two cities from the two brothers after the tamarind tree story. The other city said, well, we should actually be the ones who control the whole land, and not that city on the other side of the mountain. So they invaded, burned the whole city down, and killed Kublai Khan, Kertanagara, in the process. The story goes that he actually quickly went to a cemetery and stood there dancing, drinking, and seeing if he could do other stuff in order to create a quick halo around him, but apparently somebody in came with a knife and the halo wasn't ready, or whatever happened, he was killed. Kertanagara is dead. The city, the big city, is burned down. There's a new king in town, and the Mongols arrive. They wonder, what do we do now? And the son-in-law of Kertanagara shows up. His name is Raden Wijaya, or Prince Wijaya. He shows up and he says, listen, I am willing to submit. If you guys help me to kick out this guy who's killed my father-in-law, I will submit to Kublai Khan. You can go back. You're happy. I'm happy. Everybody happy, except the guy who we're going to kick out. And that's exactly what happened. There was a war. At the end of the war, the Chinese said, okay, now you need to officially submit. He says, let's do that tomorrow morning. Tonight, we party. because we just won a war and have a big party. But he tells his elite troops not to drink. And by midnight, when most of the Chinese or the Mongols are completely hammered, the guy comes in and has his troops and kills them. Some of them ran up. They go back to the ships, and the admirals stand there and say, what the hell do we do here? It's far away. The winds are really good to China. Let's just back off. And they sail back and never come back. And this man, Raden Wijaya, Prince Wijaya, has to build a new city. And he does that in a particular location where there is a bunch of fruit trees. They eat the fruit and say it's very bitter. And the fruit was called Maja. So they decided to call the place Majapahit, bitter Maja fruit. That's the name of it. And where do they build that city? They build it where that unification place took place. That Wurare, that temple, the tamarinds were supposedly the tamarind tree stood. We're talking 250 years later. I don't think tamarind trees survived that long, but it doesn't matter. That place, that's where they built that city. It's a bit of a strange location. It's not close to a river, so they had to go to a river and these sort of things. But spiritually, that was the place of unification. He builds that place up. Now he becomes king, all nice and well. And then we have a moment whereby there's another king that takes over. We're not going to go into details, all in the stories. But one of the daughters of Kertanegara still wants to reunify that land. But she doesn't know how. She's not the king. And there's a young guy that comes up through the ranks in the army. His name is Rotting Elephant. He is presumably a big man, and you don't want to stand in front of him. His name in Indonesian is Gajah Mada. He's a young, ambitious guy. Again, no royal blood or anything like that. He comes up through the ranks, and she works with him, and he moves around his allegiances a couple of times and stuff like that. He's a political operator, and they basically kill the king and take over, and her daughter becomes the queen, and then her son becomes the king, Hayam Wuruk, that is together with Gajah Mada bring this empire, Majapahit, to the peak. And that is probably around 1350, 1360. They send out ships. They still had weapons that they got from the Chinese. The Chinese came in with cannons, so they left some of them as they fled away. So they had suddenly military equipment. They had, because the trading was still taking place, they had a lot of wealth. The stability helped with that as well. So they could actually build a big navy, and they sailed all the way to northern Sumatra. They attacked there. They had supposedly 200,000 people that helped them to invade what is now Singapore. I don't know, that's really 200,000 people. They had massive ships. When the Portuguese, for the first time, arrived in the Malacca Strait, they came with a small ship, blah, 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 all the way from Portugal and India, and the ships that the Javanese had were 3 or 4 times the size. There were 1,000 people on it. They transported whole families of elephants on these ships. So these were massive ships. These people were very good mariners. They knew how to navigate, they knew how to sail, and they had a very strong army. In a way, I believe that later on in the 14th century, when the Chinese go out of China, I suspect that actually some of that technology that the Chinese have, that's the Chenghe sort of journeys, that they got that military, that naval capabilities actually from what is now the Indonesians or the Malay, as you could call it. Now, it goes all the way to the peak. That's in 1350. Gajah Mada rules with a strong fist. The king, Hayam Wuruk, is 30 years younger than him. That helps as well. He's the elderly statesman that controls everything. He has got connections. He's got the army. And the younger king likes to dance and to drink and these sort of things. So it's somehow kind of a nice combination. It seems to work. But the king wants to get married. And the one area that they have in the whole of Asia, of the whole of, say, the archipelago, not all of Asia, the whole of the archipelago, that they don't really have under control is West Java, because it's mountainous, difficult place to get into and stuff like that. So they decide, instead of invading the place, West Java, let's get married to the daughter of the king. And that effectively brings them into the situation as well. Now, that marriage that's in the book goes horrendously wrong. The king arrives there from West Java, the king of West Java, with his princess to get married to Hayam Wuruk, but Gajah Mada makes it at the last moment clear this is not a marriage of equals, right? She's a concubine, right? Because you submit your land to us. Now, of course, there's a bit of a disagreement there. That turns into a fight, a fist fight. That turns into a full-blown war 2 hours later. And the whole Sundanese mission that had arrived on hundreds of ships was annihilated and murdered and killed on a field called Bubat. And even until today, West Java, Central Java, and East Java, West Java is separated to a certain extent. In 2017, when Yogyakarta built a ring road, it decided to name it after that particular king from West Java. Because in Central and East Java, they never used names of kings from West Java because there was this sort of tension within Java over the centuries that maybe started with this war in that field called Bubat. And in West Java, they would never use the name of a king. Only in Jakarta you can find Gajah Mada Street and Hayam Street. By the way, there's a Kertanegara Street, but it's a very small street. So when they had to give Indonesian street names after the Dutch left, the street that they gave to Kertanegara, who I think was the unifier of the archipelago to a large extent, actually he just got a small alley, I would almost say. Gajah Mada and Hayam were very well known. They got some of the big streets in North Jakarta. But anyway, in West Java, they never used the names of the kings of Majapahit. That anomaly, that antagonism was still to a large extent around until quite recently, until Yogyakarta said, we're going to use the name of the king of West Java from a long time ago, and that will be the name for our ring road, in order to build these bridges again that have so long ago been burned. Now, that wedding goes horribly wrong. Gajah Mada is out of favor, he's going to flee, he comes back, they need him, but 20 years later he dies out of old age, most likely. And then things go slowly backwards for Majapahit. It's still a big empire, but the king is not seen as strong as Gajah Mada. There's a beautiful letter written by the king of Brunei to the king of China at the time, so this is about 1380. Whereby he says, every year we are obliged to sell camphor trees to Majapahit. We're more than willing to give them to you in Beijing, as long as, could you please tell the Majapahit people that we're having now a deal with you. They didn't want to get themselves involved, but they were trying to find alliances with China. And Sumatra did this, and Thailand did this. And slowly the outer parts of this empire started to crumble, and it became smaller and smaller, and you can see that in the book as well, and less is known, so that by late 1400s, or maybe 1527, that's the date that I presume in the book actually, that the empire falls. Why did I pick 1527? Because the army, the Muslim army that came from the northern part of Java to say, we're going to take just an end to this empire in East Java, Majapahit, just run it over, burn it down, whatever is left, is not big, but we are now in control here. That army did that maybe in the early part of the year. Later on in the year, they went to West Java and ran over another city and renamed it Jayakarta, which became Jakarta. So actually the birth of Jakarta is exactly in the same day, the same year as the death of Majapahit. Now, I've spoken for a half an hour now. I got maybe 1 or 2 minutes left, but you can see some of the stories that have played out in the past revive. I've told you about the commoner that comes up, the dynasties, the color of the flags, but a lot of the traditions that these people have, Hindu, Buddhist traditions. For example, if somebody dies after 40 days and after 100 days and after 1,000 days, you would have remembrance services to these people. That is still very much alive, and that's actually Indian influences that have come in and been Indonesianized and are still very much alive in Indonesia today. It's a Muslim country, but if you scratch and you take the surface off, all of that Majapahit Hindu Buddhist sort of culture starts to emerge and comes up there again. So Majapahit, to a large extent, created Southeast Asia as we know it very much today. And that's why I think it deserved about 3 years of my life to write this the book and eventually get it out, despite the fact that this prominent publisher wasn't necessarily in agreement of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Herald. I'm just going to ask one question, and then everybody else can ask questions, because that's how it should be. My question is this. Majapahit was defeated by the Muslim Sultanate of
Demak.
Demak. Yeah. And now Indonesia is 80% Muslim, roughly speaking. How far is that a barrier towards Indonesia having a proper understanding of its own history, not just of the Majapahit, but of the Srivijayans and the history of Indonesian settlement, colonization of Madagascar, which is something which most people know nothing about at all. And they hear all about the wonders of Zheng He, when 1,000 years earlier the Indonesians were colonizing Madagascar. So that's my question.
Yes. So let me answer maybe a little bit like this, because Indonesia is a country that doesn't have Indonesians. That sounds odd, but of course people that have a passport are Indonesians. But there is not one, as you call it, suku, one sort of nationality. The Balinese are different from the Javanese are different from the Sumatrans. The language they speak in Ambon and in Sulawesi is different again. Their original languages. Of course, they have unifying effects. But still, it's a country that can keep itself together by making sure, and I think Indonesia to a large extent, its political leaders understand that, to making sure that they remain tolerant of each other. If Indonesia would declare itself a Muslim state, parts of Indonesia would say we break off because we don't consider ourselves. That would be East Indonesia. Bali, as I said, is predominantly Hindu. But it's this sort of, and this is written in a book actually, in the Majapahit days, there was a writer called Tantular, who wrote a nice sentence in his book, which is broadly defined as, we have unity in diversity. We are one in all. And this has become the motto of Indonesia, that you can have all these different opinions and religions and languages, but we can still all remain together, as long as you have a sense of tolerance between these people and these beliefs. And I think that's what's keeping Indonesia together to a very large extent. Sukarno in 1945 declared independence and said a proclamation. I think it was 10 in the morning, but they worked through the whole night. What should they write down? In the end, it was something, we hereby declare independence, and all the other details will come later. Because there were so many people that had all kinds of different ideas of what the new Indonesia should be and how they should declare independence. And there was, of course, a group of people that said, we want to declare Indonesia as a Muslim country, as an independence. Sukarno resisted that whole idea because he would feel that that would make sure that other parts of the country could not align themselves, and that would break up the country. So it's a country that is incredibly diverse in language, in religion, in history, in ethnic background, but is able to keep together. And I think a lot of that, if you read through the writings that they had in the Majapahit days, there is always this stress on bringing people together. It's partially because of economic reasons. As long as everybody could trade there, they had that common interest. But that sort of tolerance that I think Indonesia has is something that might well have originated, amongst others, in the days of Majapahit.
Thank you very much. Right. Questions, please.
I know it's a difficult topic if you haven't ever read the book yet. Page 99 is the page to look for, by the way.
Gentleman over here.
I didn't finish the book. I just started the book. I didn't finish it yet. But, well, that's one of the questions when you do research about the history of Asia. You have the huge island on Kalimantan. You have all the Philippine archipelago. But yet all the dynasties, civilizations, and architectural oddities are in such a little place like Java compared to most of the regions around. What do you think this island became so significant in all the Southeast Asian context compared to all the
You
other?
mean how they become so significant in light of what happened, for example, in China? Or
Compared to, I mean, you see Sumatra is much bigger. I guess there's more resources. Kalimantan is definitely much bigger, but yet all the civilizations, temples, and architecture.
it's only Java.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a very simple answer to this, and I think that's geography to a large extent. If you ever go, even now, if you go to Sumatra, and I'm planning to go there in January, February to look at the remnants of Srivijaya there, if you drive between one or two cities, it takes you 10 to 12 hours. Because the roads, they're now building a trans-Sumatran highway, but access is difficult. and in particular in those days. You needed to get up the rivers, and these rivers not easily to navigate. There were big mountains. Java, Central Java and Eastern Java, and Western Java a bit different, is flattish. There are volcanoes, but there are large valleys that are flattish, where the water comes down. They're incredibly fertile. So the population there was always bigger. So it's purely a geography, fertility, kind of, and population that dominates. And that's still the case. The number of people living on Java, I think, is about 200 million. And then the other 100 million live in all the outer regions of Indonesia. But to a certain extent, what also benefited them, and maybe this is also what you asked, is that at times, so Kublai Khan had an aggressive sort of external foreign policy, going into the South China Sea, invading Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, and these sort of things. After him, that family had also its own internal problems, so they scaled that down, and that allowed them to flourish as well and to keep control. Even at the heydays of Hayam Wuruk, when he was the big king, 1360, 1370, and Gajah Mada was already an old man, I told you that they had a phenomenal navy, that they could control the lands, could control the archipelago and the seas, but they still struggled with their army on land. This king, having a lavish lifestyle in what is now the city of Majapahit, it's now called Mojokerto. Every year, for 3 months, he had to take a tour through all districts. And that was an arduous sort of travel, with elephants and oxen and stuff. And he would travel for 300 or 400 kilometers as one trip. That's almost 1,000 kilometers over a couple of months to go around to make sure that all these district leaders are pledge allegiance to him. He would come there with goods and give them. They, in return, often gave them goods back from the region and daughters. And some of these ladies he brought back home for, for acquaintances and stuff like that. So, but he was really busy trying to continue to build these kind of domestic, onshore, if you want to call it, alliances, even at height of power.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Elisa. I have a question like you. I am Dutch. And we, as the Netherlands, in the Netherlands, they seem to have a really interesting relationship with Indonesia now since the independence. Mm-hmm. And for example, you got really into it. I have an uncle who lives in Indonesia. There's a really close relationship. Can you explain a bit more about where this comes from? And yep. I'm not sure whether it's reciprocal, but it's certainly there's a very deep connection still in the Netherlands with Indonesia on a almost romanticized cultural thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way the Dutch stand in the Netherlands-Indonesia relationship is very different than the Indonesians. I think if I can summarize it, the Dutch are backward-looking, Indonesians are forward-looking. What I mean with that is that, yes, so after Jakarta was set up, I mentioned that, 1527, you go about 80 years forward. The Portuguese, by that time, have arrived, the Dutch arrived. They arrived, they burned the whole place down, and they take control over it, as you did in those days, and colonize it to a large extent. By the way, the empire that the Dutch, the colonial empire that they built in the days, very much mimics what Majapahit had as well. It's just the broader bend of the archipelago. 1945, actually I was taught at school, it was 1949, so it was wrong. But 1945, the Dutch go out, there's an independence war, Indonesia becomes independent. And the relationship, of course, for quite some time was strained. And I remember I lived in Indonesia in the 1990s, I think it was Beatrix, the Queen Beatrix came, and Suharto did not see her, but she could see some of the ministers, so there was still a strain. But that relationship has changed, I think. We've gone well beyond that. If you look at Indonesian corporates that do business in Europe, the very vast majority go to the Netherlands and set up a BV there. Now, there might be for tax reasons, and also we're probably in Europe the only place where you can have decent Indonesian food, but that helps. But there is still a connection. And I think the Indonesians look forward in that connection. What can you do to help us build business and grow ourselves? Indonesia is a country that is surging again. It's becoming bigger. It is an entity that we don't always know too much about it, as you highlighted, Philip, but it's a big economy. It's a key driver of overall economic growth globally now. And there's a sense of pride that comes back. And I think I did a book tour in Indonesia about a month ago. There was an overwhelming interest, thank God, in it. But I think there is something that people can look back on, and it's an accessible book that they say, hey, this is something we can relate to quite easily. The Dutch look differently, I think. We have two sorts of relationship. You have the relationship that probably you and I have. I don't know if you're Dutch, but your husband is, I believe. Or you are as well, yeah. So we have this kind of romantic, nice holiday, fantastic place. We'd like to go there. We heard about it, sort of relationship. That's a very friendly relationship. And then we have another relationship whereby in the Netherlands, the generation of people that fought to keep Indonesia in the Dutch fold in 1945 is now at the very end of their lifetime. And a lot of these people pass away. And what we now see is that there is a shift, I think, in the Netherlands of how we're looking at it. A couple of years ago, the Dutch ambassador in Indonesia, he's just left actually, he told me that during the time that he was in Indonesia, a couple of times he had meetings with the Indonesian government whereby he had to apologize or say, well, we've done this, and because pressure came from Holland to do that. And the response of the Indonesians was, we have to talk about these apologies again? You had another meeting about it. They've moved on. They are looking forward. What we also see is that some of the statues, so the statue that is on page 99 of the book, is now being transported back to Indonesia. You could argue it's its rightful place to a certain extent. So some of these things that the Dutch took on, they're now returning to Indonesia. It comes at quite an unfortunate moment in time because there was a big fire in the National Museum in Jakarta, so they have to refurbish it. I believe in October it's going to open up again, but some of the statues hopefully will then be again on display. So it's a very complex relationship where they don't always stand in it in the same way, I think, the Dutch and the Indonesians. And very lastly, maybe to say, it is an advantage that I'm Dutch by writing the book. I mean, you said there is no English sources. A lot of it's actually Dutch archaeological reports that over a Thursday, over a Saturday or Sunday, I had to trail through and read. A lot of actually what we know about Majapahit is written by people like, there's a Professor Berg, there's a Krom. It's all still in Dutch, and some of it is not digitalized yet. So I had to go back to Holland and buy books, and as my wife knows, I had suitcases of books in order to get them back. To get all the appropriate sources and digest all of that and turn it into a story, to a large extent, yes.
Hi, I'm To Han Shi, a Singaporean living in Hong Kong. So are you saying that around the Majapahit era, the reason why other Southeast Asian kingdoms decided to pay tribute to China under the Ming Dynasty and the Cheng He voyages is because they wanted to wean themselves off the influence of the Majapahit Empire, and they saw China as a useful counterbalance against Indonesia?
Yes. To a certain extent, in the late 1300s, was definitely the case. Maybe if you go 100 years later, that was much less the case because Majapahit didn't have the influence. But in Southeast Asia, Majapahit, on a large extent, was, I would say, under control. However, if you were in South Thailand, Majapahit is a really long way away from you. So you could do some of your own things. And Majapahit didn't do it like what the Romans did, put a governor there, say we have our army there, we control this. They said, you pay allegiance to us. Once a year, you have to sail over and come to us in East Java and be at ceremonies, and we drink and feast, and you pay me some stuff, and I give you some stuff back. But you are part of the family, you could say. And people did this as long as they had an economic interest in doing so. And as long as the trade went all through East Java, that's where you make the money. As to a certain extent, things still happen today, but now in other cities. So they pledged sort of allegiance to this. But when they saw that the benefits of being part of it started to shift, and that actually you could also do more trade with China when it became bigger and more open as well, and it was a bit unsure what happened with these Majapahit people in East Java, people started to switch allegiances. Now, there's a nice situation. There was a king with a long name, Aditya Varman, in Sumatra, who was brought up in East Java, went to Sumatra and they say, you become the ruler of Sumatra for us. Big place, you do that for us. Good. He tried to wean off. He sent his own diplomat to, this is 1380s. He sent his own diplomat to Beijing. Beijing said, oh, nice. I didn't know that you had 2 kings over there, but fine, good. We'll feast and do something. Majapahit heard of it and sent a letter to Beijing. He says, don't do that. That's our guy. And the king of China at the time, the emperor, apologized. So, hey, sorry, didn't want to get into your local business. So at that time, they still considered it a mighty empire. 25 years later, there is a struggle again between sons of a king, as it always goes. They fight each other. Majapahit significantly weakened in a civil war. And what do the Chinese emperor do? He sends a couple of diplomats there to, you go talk with that one, you talk with that one, and stir it up a little bit. And that's exactly what they did. So you can see that in the early 1400s that allegiances started to shift quite quickly. And Brunei is one of these examples of that.
Question here?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, what was it?
Microphone.
Microphone.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Herald. So, Philip Wyatt. Yeah, quick one on demographic changes. I don't know how much information there is on population changes during this 250 years, but would you say that part of the problem was at the peak that there were a lot of people flowing into the archipelago from the west, and the west got bigger and bigger and bigger population-wise, and they weren't able to keep control? Could that be, apart from the infighting and the civil, can that have fed the civil strife in terms of its final downfall? Because it seems to have had ebbs and flows, but there was like a more permanent change after the 1400s. Do you know much about the population changes?
The population change. No, we unfortunately we don't really have clear statistics on that day from those years on demographics. What we do know is that there was much more land than people, because the ultimate aim was, can we get the forest down and people live there? Can we multiply? That was the idea. So there was a lot of room to grow, and some estimates have been made. Now 200 million people live on that place. That in those days we're talking about maybe 4 or 5 million. So very different. However, there is something that I believe only in a footnote. There's something interesting that happens. I told about Kertanegara, that he tried to build his halo around the Southeast Asian archipelago in spiritual ways, military ways, but there's something else as well. There's a particular rice variety that the Cambodians have that is more fertile, and you could do more harvest with it, and you get bigger and more bountiful harvest. That was prevalent in Cambodia, Angkor Wat, in that area there. The Chinese get access to that rice variety in the 1200s. And in southern China, it seems to have flourished, and that more food means more people. My suspicion is that there was because we know there was a positive relationship between those people in Cambodia and Kertanegara. Not only did he try to give him protection, although when it came to it, he didn't, but also he sent one of his kind of nieces there to marry with one of the kings. We only know that out of an inscription in Cambodia. My suspicion is that maybe some of that rice has come back in return, because when Kertanegara unifies the lands, he stabilizes, we also see, the impression we get is that the economy really takes off. And you can see this in the arts. If you like batik, which you can see I'm a fan of that, in the statues that are being built, suddenly the kind of dresses that the people wear, the motifs that they use become incredibly complex. One of them, because they started to do this tantric sort of stuff, if you do these ceremonies, you unleash all sorts of powers in these ceremonies. That was what they believed. So they created dresses with interlocking circles to protect them against the powers. Now, if you take these interlocking circles over the centuries and you elongate them a bit and you change them a bit, you get batik motifs. So it's the start of what the batik motifs actually come from. My shirt is a big eagle, so it doesn't have this particular example, but these motifs started to emerge there. So we see a flourishing of the art, of the economy, And probably we know that the population was growing, and my suspicion is that part of that was actually that they got different rice varieties coming in as well that allowed that to and allowed them to grow and become more important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tony Watson, Far East Investment Management. Much commercial contact between Majapahit and the lands, let's say, west of India, so like Aden, Yemen, that kind of place, Middle East, into Africa?
Yes. Not too long ago, I went to a museum in Oman, and I'm looking at what happens in the earlier days in Srivijaya, and Persian ships, and Persian was a kind of a white sort of thing. Persian ships were used to sail around, also to get to Majapahit. So there was a lot of Indians, there was a lot of Chinese, people from Bengal and places like that. But there were also people that came from the Arab lands. Not a lot, but I found some evidence of that in Oman. They sailed a long way.
One more question. Yeah?
One more question here.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Herald, for your presentation. You know, what you talked about, this dynasty and how it felt, it looks so amazingly similar to what's been happening in India, you know, around that time and prior to that. In fact, these two countries have similar histories, similar colonial history. They became independent around the same time. In fact, even almost on the same dates. 15th August for India, 17th August for Indonesia, 45 and 47. There's been a lot of osmosis of Indian culture into Southeast Asia. In fact, there's a recent book by William Dalrymple, you know, who talks just about that. You know, what I was wondering is that, you know, how do you see this, you know, kind of translating going forward into present-day geopolitics?
I have a nice answer to that. So you're right. So very quickly, the Indians brought Hinduism and Java and Buddhism there, but the Indonesians transformed it into something really their own. That's the nice thing of it. And some of that was brought back. So there are strains in Buddhism, and we don't have to go into that necessarily here, that went up into Tibet. Javanese monks that went to Tibet and went to China to influence actually religion there as well. And I suspect that would be in Dalrymple's book as well, but that's taken place. So there was a mutual understanding. And you're right, Indonesia and India, I believe this year, have a joint diplomatic relationship of 75 years, because next week, the Indian ambassador in Indonesia is hosting a dinner to talk about exactly that, and talk about Majapahit in the sense of Indonesia and India. Yeah, he's paying the bill for that, so it's very nice of him to do. But yeah, so in that context. But you're right, there's an enormous amount of similarities between these two places, and they fed upon each other artistically and culturally and economically to a large extent.
Our time is up, and I'm going to ask one last question. The region that we're dealing with on the time of Majapahit was, I think, Nusantara, which was actually a word invented during the Majapahit era.
Yes.
So, what is your view about the choice of the name of the new capital of Indonesia, and what that may or may not do for Indonesia's sense of identity and historical continuity?
Yeah, no, I think so. Indonesia is building a new capital. It does it in Kalimantan. It's had to literally hack the trees away in order to build it. On TV, I've seen there's now a decent city being built, quite sizable. They called it Nusantara because Nusantara is the word that they used to describe the archipelago for the first time. It means archipelago to a large extent. The islands that were unified in what I mentioned by Kertanegara and then later generations onwards as well. So it's, in that sense, a very apt name. There are, of course, also people in Indonesia say that live maybe in Sulawesi say, yeah, but that's the name you guys invaded us as well. So it has, within Indonesia, different sort of connotations as well. But I think it's an apt name. It's right in the heart of Indonesia. And it's about the unification of the lands, as I spoke about. So in that sense, for identity purposes, I would say it's pretty good. How they're going to build that further out is something that is still open for debate, and we'll see that in the future.
Right, well, with that, I'm afraid our time is up. So, Harold, I'd like to thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Philip. Very, very much.
We don't have a gift for you because
No.
you're already a member. So
Yeah, exactly. And the gift is actually here to talk because I've worked for it for years, and for me to waffle on this for hours on is that's the best gift I can get, right? So that's good. You want to make a picture, right? Thank you.